Chapter 4, Section 2, The First Years of the New Nation. In 1790, the United States was beginning its new life as a nation. It had a constitution and its first president, George Washington. That year, the government took its first national census and learned that the country had nearly 4 million people. Most Americans were still clustered along the eastern seaboard, but some hardy pioneers had begun to move inland. The country expands beyond its colonial borders. In these early years, the United States was predominantly a rural nation. However, it did have a number of flourishing cities, including the old colonial centers of Philadelphia, New York, and Boston. The country also was expanding beyond its original 13 states. Between 1790 and 1800, 3 new states entered the Union: Vermont, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Many settlers were migrating west across the Appalachian Mountains into the area known as the Northwest Territory. This territory would later become the states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Settlers were also moving into the area of present-day Mississippi and Alabama. By the early 1800s, American settlements were scattered across a large territory from the Atlantic Ocean in the east to the Mississippi River in the west. Agriculture is the center of the nation's economy. In states old and new, farming was the nation's most important economic activity. Most Americans farmed on small plots, producing food for themselves and their families. If they produced a surplus, they might sell it in nearby towns or cities. The United States had little industry at this time. Most farmers made their own clothing and tools. In urban areas, artisans produced manufactured goods by hand in small workshops. In the Northeast, there were a few small textile mills that spun cotton by machine, but large factories did not yet exist. Lack of good transportation kept most states and regions remote from each other. Moving people or goods across great distances was expensive and difficult. The few roads linking towns and cities were deeply rutted in dry weather and treacherous swamps in wet weather. Most long-distance travel took place on rivers or the ocean. George Washington gives shape to the office of president. When George Washington took the oath of office as the nation's first president in 1789, he faced a delicate task. On one hand, as he said in his inaugural speech, he was determined to provide Americans with the benefits of a united and effective government. On the other hand, he had to reassure those fellow citizens who feared that a strong president could mean the return of a monarchy. President Washington had no roadmap other than the Constitution to guide him. "I walk on untrodden ground," he said. "There is scarcely any part of my conduct which may not hereafter be drawn into precedent." The first test of Washington's authority as president came in 1791, when Congress passed a tax on whiskey to raise money. Western farmers who turned their grain into whiskey for sale were outraged. Many refused to pay the tax. Angry farmers in western Pennsylvania rose up in rebellion, attacking tax collectors and setting buildings on fire. Washington saw the Whiskey Rebellion as a threat to the federal government's authority. In 1794, President Washington sent a militia force across the Appalachians to stamp out the protests. In doing so, he made it clear that the federal government would enforce its laws. One of Washington's first official actions was to sign Congress's Federal Judiciary Act into law. This act created the federal court system, with its district and circuit courts, that we still live under today. Washington also created the first cabinet, or group of department heads, that meets to advise the president. Political parties emerge. Washington's most prominent cabinet members were Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton and Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson. Both were brilliant thinkers, but their ideas often clashed. "Hamilton and myself were daily pitted, like two fighting cocks," Jefferson wrote of the growing hostility. These differences led to the creation of the country's first political parties, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Hamilton's Federalist Party supported a strong central government with wide powers. The Federalists believed that a powerful government was needed to keep order among the states. They had little faith in the wisdom of the average citizen and thought that a capable, educated elite should run the country. In contrast, Jefferson's Democratic Republican Party favored a small central government with limited powers. The party believed that states had the right to judge whether Congress was overstepping its constitutional powers, a view known as states' rights theory. The Democratic Republicans had great confidence in the ability of ordinary people to make good decisions. They also believed that political power should lie with a majority of voters rather than with a wealthy elite. In general, Washington favored Federalist ideas. Nonetheless, in his farewell address delivered near the end of his second term in 1796, he warned of the danger of parties and spoke of the immense value of your national union to your collective and individual happiness. Once Washington left office, however, debates between the two parties grew increasingly acrimonious. John Adams, a Federalist, succeeded Washington as president. In 1800, Adams ran for a second term against Thomas Jefferson. During the campaign, partisan feelings ran so high, some worried the new nation might self-destruct. Nevertheless, the 1800 election took place without serious disturbance. Thomas Jefferson won the presidency, and power shifted peacefully from one party to the other. The country had survived a major political test.